The mysterious encounter. The planet Solara stretched out like a vast, glowing dream. Its skies shimmered in shades of violet and gold, and the ground pulsed with a faint light, as if the world itself were alive. Jake Hunter, a skilled astronaut from Earth, stood in awe as he stepped out of his small spaceship. The air was breathable but carried a strange, sweet scent that tingled in his nose. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Jake activated his scanner, its green light sweeping over the alien terrain. His mission was simple: study the planet and look for signs of life. The scanner beeped suddenly, breaking the silence. It had detected movement nearby. Jake's heart raced. He tightened his grip on his handheld communication device and whispered to himself, "Calm down, Jake. Just follow the signal." The scanner led him to a clearing surrounded by towering crystal-like trees. Their branches glowed softly, and tiny lights danced around them like fireflies. Jake moved cautiously, his boots crunching the glowing moss beneath his feet. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw something move. He froze. From behind one of the trees stepped a figure. It was a girl, though not human. Her skin shimmered like liquid silver, reflecting the light around her. Her large, luminous eyes glowed with a soft blue hue, and her hair floated around her as if it were underwater. She wore a simple, flowing garment that seemed to be made of the same glowing material as the trees. Jake took a step back, his hand hovering over his tool belt. The girl tilted her head, studying him with curiosity. Then, without moving her lips, he heard her voice in his mind. "What are you doing on my planet?" Jake blinked in surprise. He had heard about telepathic beings in the galaxy, but had never encountered one before. He took a deep breath and replied, "I mean no harm. I'm an explorer from Earth. My name is Jake." The girl's eyes widened slightly. "Earth. I've read about it. But why are you here? You're not supposed to be here." Jake hesitated. "I was sent to learn about your planet. It's beautiful, but I didn't know it was inhabited." The girl smiled faintly, her expression a mix of amusement and mystery. "We don't usually let outsiders see us. But you're different." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean, different?" Instead of answering, the girl stepped closer. Jake stood still, unsure of what to do. She reached out and touched the arm of his spacesuit. Her fingers felt warm, almost electric, even through the thick material. "You wear strange armor," she said, her voice soft yet playful. "But it won't protect you here." "What do you mean?" Jake asked, his voice tense. The girl didn't answer directly. Instead, she laughed, a light, melodic sound that echoed in the air. "Your world is so loud and heavy. Here, everything is connected. You'll see." Jake frowned. "See what? Who are you?" The girl stepped back, her glowing eyes locking with his. "My name is Lyra. I'm one of the Solari, the guardians of this planet. But you're the first outsider I've met. Tell me, Jake, what will you do if I let you stay?" Jake thought for a moment. "I'll study your world. I'll try to understand it, and I'll make sure I don't harm anything." Lyra nodded slowly, as if weighing his words. Then, out of nowhere, she asked, "You'll be inside me?" Jake's face turned bright red. "What? No. I mean, what are you talking about?" Lyra giggled, her laughter like a ripple in a quiet pond. "Don't worry. You'll understand soon." Jake opened his mouth to ask more questions, but Lyra raised her hand, silencing him. "Follow me," she said. She turned and began walking toward the dense forest ahead. "Wait," Jake called. "Where are you taking me?" Lyra glanced over her shoulder, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "To the heart of my world. If you want answers, you'll have to trust me." Jake hesitated. His training told him to stay cautious, but his curiosity was stronger. He adjusted his gear and followed her, stepping into the glowing forest. The trees seemed to hum as they passed, their lights pulsing in rhythm with his footsteps. He couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was alive, watching him, judging him. As they walked deeper, Jake asked. "Lyra, are there others like you?" She didn't look back. There were. But now, it's just me. Her words sent a shiver down his spine. What had happened to her people? He wanted to ask more, but the deeper they went, the darker and quieter the forest became. The air felt heavier, and the glowing lights dimmed. Finally, Lyra stopped in front of a massive tree whose trunk pulsed with a bright golden light. Its roots spread out like veins, and its branches reached high into the sky. Lyra turned to Jake, her expression serious for the first time. "This is where your journey begins," she said. Jake stared at the tree, feeling both awe and dread. "What is this place?" he whispered. Lyra stepped closer to the tree, placing her hand on its glowing bark. "The truth," she said softly. "If you're ready to see it." Jake took a step forward, his heart pounding. He didn't know what he was walking into, but one thing was certain: his life would never be the same. The alien's curiosity. Jake followed Lyra through the glowing forest, the soft hum of energy filling the air like a distant song. The strange lights floating around them danced lazily, casting shimmering shadows on the mossy ground. Every step felt like crossing into a dream, and yet Jake's senses stayed sharp. His hand hovered near his tool belt, though he wasn't sure what he was preparing for. Lyra moved with an effortless grace, her bare feet making no sound as she led him deeper into the woods. Occasionally, she glanced over her shoulder at him, as if making sure he hadn't vanished. But her eyes, bright and curious, always lingered a little too long, like she was trying to figure him out. Jake finally broke the silence. "Why do you keep staring at me like that?" Lyra smiled faintly. "I've never seen a human up close. You're strange." Jake chuckled nervously. "I could say the same about you." She stopped, turning to face him directly. Her eyes glowed brighter, reflecting the golden hues of the forest around them. "No, you're different from the stories. You're smaller, weaker." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Gee, thanks." Lyra laughed, the sound light and playful, but her gaze didn't waver. "It's not an insult, just an observation. I thought humans were supposed to be giants, fierce, and strong." Jake crossed his arms. "We are strong, just in different ways." Lyra tilted her head, clearly unconvinced. She stepped closer, reaching out to touch his arm again. Jake felt the same electric warmth pulse through his suit as her fingertips brushed the fabric. "I can't feel you properly through this," she said, tugging gently at the sleeve. Jake pulled his arm back, shaking his head. "Sorry. This suit's staying on." Lyra's eyes narrowed in confusion. "Why?" "Let's just say I'm not comfortable walking around a strange planet without protection." Lyra's lips curved into a sly smile. "Your protection won't matter here. This planet doesn't hurt visitors, unless it decides to." Jake shifted uneasily. "That's not very reassuring." Lyra giggled again, but there was a flicker of something beneath the surface. Curiosity, yes, but also a quiet sense of knowing. They continued walking until the trees thinned, revealing a wide, glowing river ahead. The water shimmered in blues and purples, reflecting the stars above. Lyra crouched near the edge and dipped her hand into the stream. The water clung to her fingers like liquid light. Jake knelt beside her, watching the strange display. "Is this normal water?" Lyra shook her head. "No, it's part of the planet's lifeblood. The river connects to everything." She lifted her hand, letting the glowing liquid drip back into the stream. "Even us." Jake stared at her, puzzled. "You keep saying things like that the planet connects to us. What does that mean?" Lyra's gaze met his, soft yet intense. "It means we're not separate from this place. The trees, the water, even the air, it's all alive. And we're part of it." Jake frowned. "That's poetic, but I don't really get it." Lyra studied him carefully, her eyes narrowing in thought. "Maybe you will, but you can't just watch. You have to feel it." She reached out again, this time pressing her palm gently to Jake's chest. right over his heart. Jake stiffened, unsure of what to do. Hey, personal space. Lyra didn't move. Her eyes locked with his, unblinking. Why does your heart beat so fast? Jake laughed awkwardly. Because you're being weird. Lyra smiled faintly but didn't let go. It's strange. I can hear it. She tapped her temple lightly. Through here, the way humans feel emotions. It's loud. Jake took a step back, creating some distance. I guess we're just built that way. Lyra folded her arms, clearly amused. You're guarded. That's rare for visitors. Most are eager to feel the connection. Jake raised an eyebrow. Visitors? I thought you said I was the first human you've seen. Lyra's smile faded slightly. She glanced toward the horizon, where the faint outline of distant mountains shimmered in the golden haze. I meant humans. There have been others, from different places. Jake caught the hesitation in her voice. What happened to them? Lyra didn't answer right away. Her eyes darkened, and for the first time since they met, she looked less playful, more cautious. Some stayed, she said softly, but not all of them left this planet the way they came. A cold chill crept down Jake's spine. What do you mean by that? Lyra met his gaze, her expression unreadable. You'll understand soon. Jake exhaled sharply, rubbing the back of his neck. You keep saying that. I'd prefer if you just told me. Lyra stepped back from the river, brushing her silver hair behind her ear. If I told you everything now, you'd leave. Jake hesitated. The certainty in her voice unsettled him, but something about her, something about this entire planet, kept pulling him in. He sighed and gestured ahead. All right, lead the way. Lyra smiled again, this time softer. Good. I think the planet likes you, Jake. Let's see how far it will let you go. As they walked along the glowing riverbank, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping deeper into something far bigger than he could understand. And for the first time, he wondered if he was ready for it. The forbidden forest. The forest grew darker as Jake followed Lyra deeper into its heart. The air thickened, humming with an energy he couldn't explain. The towering crystal trees that once glowed softly now pulsed faintly, as if warning him to turn back. Despite the eerie shift, Jake pressed forward, keeping his eyes on Lyra's graceful figure ahead. She moved silently, her feet barely touching the mossy ground. Every now and then, she glanced back at him, her expression unreadable. Jake couldn't decide if she was leading him to something incredible or something dangerous. Breaking the silence, Jake muttered, So, this place feels different. Why does it seem like the trees are watching me? Lyra didn't stop walking but replied calmly, They are. Everything here watches. Everything listens. Jake chuckled nervously. Right, that's not unsettling at all. Lyra smiled faintly but said nothing more. A few moments later, Jake noticed a change in the landscape. The trees here were larger, their branches twisted and gnarled. Unlike the gentle glow of the outer forest, these trees flickered with sharp bursts of light, like silent lightning trapped within their trunks. The air carried a faint crackling sound, almost like whispers. Jake slowed his steps. This doesn't look like the rest of the forest. Lyra finally stopped, turning to face him. Her glowing eyes met his, serious and focused. That's because it isn't. This part of the forest is forbidden. Jake frowned. Forbidden by who? You live here alone, right? Lyra nodded slowly. I live here, but the planet remembers. It remembers those who shouldn't have come. Jake crossed his arms, feeling the weight of her words, and I'm guessing I shouldn't be here either. Lyra's gaze softened. You're different, but even different visitors must be careful. Jake glanced around at the pulsing trees. The ground beneath him vibrated faintly, as if the forest itself had a heartbeat. Why bring me here if it's dangerous? Lyra stepped closer, lowering her voice. Because this is where the planet speaks the loudest. And I think it wants to speak to you. Jake raised an eyebrow. Speak to me. I'm not exactly fluent in living planet. Lyra's lips curved into a small smile. You don't need to speak. You only need to listen. Before Jake could respond, Lyra reached out, touching the nearest tree. The second her palm pressed against the bark, the tree's glow intensified, illuminating the entire clearing. Jake instinctively shielded his eyes from the sudden brightness. When the light faded, Jake saw something he hadn't expected. Beneath the surface of the tree, faint images swirled, like memories trapped inside the bark. He stepped closer, mesmerized. The images shifted rapidly, strange alien creatures, cities that looked like they were carved from light, and figures that resembled Lyra, but older. What is this? Jake whispered. Lyra's voice was soft but steady. The past. This tree remembers everything. It carries the memories of my people, and those who came before you. Jake stared at the swirling images, unable to look away. Your people, where are they now? Lyra's expression darkened, and she lowered her hand. The images faded, leaving the tree dim once more. Gone, she said simply. They became part of the planet. Their energy, it never left. Jake's heart sank. You mean they're not dead, Lyra interrupted gently. They exist differently now, but they can't return the way they once were. Jake let out a slow breath, unsure how to process what he was hearing. And you? Why are you still here like this? Lyra's gaze lingered on the glowing moss beneath her feet. I was chosen to stay, to guide the planet's next visitor. And now, that's you. Jake took a step back, running his hand through his hair. Look, Lyra, I didn't come here to become part of a planet's memory. I'm just here to explore, maybe collect data, and leave. Lyra met his gaze with calm certainty. You can leave, but you won't want to. Jake opened his mouth to argue, but before he could, the forest trembled. A low, rumbling sound echoed from deep within the ground. The trees flickered wildly, and the moss beneath his feet glowed brighter. Jake stumbled back. But is that normal? Lyra didn't answer. Her eyes narrowed, and she pressed her palm against the tree again. The glow stabilized, but the air felt heavier, almost pressing down on Jake's chest. Lyra's expression hardened. Something's coming. The forest feels it. Jake straightened. Something's coming. Care to be a little more specific? Lyra took his hand, her grip firm but warm, and pulled him forward. We need to move. Now. They ran through the forest, the trees flashing urgently as they passed. Jake's heart pounded, though he wasn't sure if it was from running or the growing sense of dread swirling in his gut. Finally, they reached another clearing, but this one felt different. In the center stood a massive tree, far larger than the others. Its branches stretched high into the sky, and its roots twisted across the ground like veins of light. Lyra stopped, breathing hard. She looked at Jake, her eyes glowing fiercely. This tree, it's the heart of the forest. If you want answers, touch it. Jake hesitated, staring at the enormous tree. The same strange, electric hum filled the air around it, vibrating deep in his bones. Are you sure this is safe? He asked. Lyra's voice was barely a whisper. No, but it's the only way. Jake swallowed hard and stepped forward, raising his hand. As his fingers brushed the tree's surface, the world around him shifted, and everything went white. The connection ritual. The world around Jake dissolved into pure white, the moment his fingers touched the ancient tree. There was no sound, no forest, no ground beneath his feet, just endless, blinding light. For a brief, disorienting moment, he wondered if he had died. But then, faint whispers echoed around him. Soft at first, like a breeze carrying distant voices, they grew louder, overlapping and cascading into a strange harmony of thoughts and emotions. Jake couldn't make out the words, but he felt them, like fragments of memories not his own, slipping into his mind. His pulse quickened. He tried to pull his hand away from the tree, but it wouldn't budge. "Lyra," he called out, but his voice echoed strangely, as if he were underwater. "Relax." Lyra's voice drifted through the light, calm and steady. "It's only just beginning." Jake forced himself to breathe deeply, fighting the urge to panic. Slowly, the blinding light softened, and shapes began to emerge. At first, they were blurry, like shadows moving behind a veil. But soon, the veil lifted. Jake found himself standing in what looked like a city, but this wasn't like any city he'd seen before. Towers made of shimmering crystal stretched high into the sky, reflecting light in brilliant colors. The streets were lined with glowing plants, and strange vehicles hovered silently above the ground. And then he saw them. The Solari. They walked through the streets in elegant robes, their silver skin shimmering in the sunlight. They moved gracefully, speaking in soft, musical voices. Jake took a step forward, but his foot made no sound. It felt like he was walking through a memory, an observer in someone else's dream. Lyra's voice echoed beside him. "This is how my people once lived, before the fall." Jake turned to see her standing next to him, her eyes filled with quiet sadness as she gazed at the scene. "What happened to them?" Jake asked, watching the peaceful city. Lyra extended her hand, and the scene shifted. The sky darkened. The towers began to flicker. The Solari who had been walking the streets suddenly froze, their faces turning toward the heavens. Jake followed their gaze. A massive shadow loomed over the city, an enormous, sleek ship that blocked out the sun. Its surface was black, covered in strange symbols that pulsed ominously. Jake's stomach twisted. "Who are they?" "Invaders," Lyra said quietly. "They came from beyond the stars. They wanted our planet's energy, but not to share." The memory unfolded before Jake's eyes. Dark figures descended from the ship, their forms hidden beneath heavy armor. The Solari resisted, but their peaceful technology was no match for the invaders. One by one, the towers collapsed, and the glowing plants withered. Jake clenched his fists as the scene played out. Why didn't anyone help? Lyra's gaze didn't leave the memory. By the time help arrived, it was too late. Most of my people had already joined with the planet. "Joined?" Jake repeated. Lyra placed a hand on his shoulder. "Watch." The scene shifted again. This time, Jake saw a group of Solari standing before the massive ancient tree, the same one he had touched. They held hands, forming a circle. Light poured from their bodies, sinking into the ground and flowing into the roots of the tree. One by one, the Solari faded, until only the tree remained, glowing brighter than ever. Jake stared in disbelief. They became part of the planet. Lyra nodded softly. Their energy lives on within the forest, within the rivers, the sky, even the stars. Jake looked at her, confusion flickering in his eyes. "Then why are you still here like this?" Lyra lowered her gaze. "Because I was chosen to be the planet's voice. Someone had to remain, to speak with visitors." Jake ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. "And now the planet is trying to connect with me. Is that what this ritual is?" Lyra's eyes met his, serious but gentle. "Yes. The planet has been waiting for someone like you." Jake frowned. "Why me?" Lyra smiled faintly. "Because you're not just here to explore. You care." Before Jake could respond, the ground beneath them trembled. The memory shattered like glass, and suddenly they were standing back in the clearing, the ancient tree towering before them. Jake stumbled back, blinking rapidly. The light faded from the tree's bark, and the forest returned to its quiet hum. He took a deep breath. That was intense. Lyra stepped forward, placing a hand on the tree's trunk. "The connection has begun. You're part of the forest now, Jake." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Part of it? I didn't sign up for that." Lyra's soft laugh echoed through the trees. "It's not permanent, but you'll feel it. The planet will call to you, even after you leave." Jake crossed his arms, studying the tree carefully. He could still feel a faint warmth in his chest, as if the tree's energy lingered inside him. "So, what now?" he asked. Lyra's gaze lifted toward the horizon, where dark clouds were beginning to gather. Her smile faded. "Now, we prepare. The invaders are returning." The aliens passed. The sky above the forest darkened, casting long shadows across the clearing. Jake stood beside Lyra, his heart still racing from the connection ritual. The warmth he had felt moments ago was already fading, replaced by an unsettling chill. Lyra's gaze remained fixed on the horizon, where distant, jagged peaks stretched into the sky. The dark clouds gathering above them swirled unnaturally, like ink spilling into water. Jake broke the silence. "You said the invaders are returning, but how do you know for sure?" Lyra's silver eyes glowed faintly as she turned toward him. "The planet remembers their energy. When they draw near, the forest reacts. The tremors, the sky, it's all connected." Jake crossed his arms, glancing at the shifting clouds. "If your people became part of the planet, shouldn't they be able to stop the invaders?" Lyra stepped forward, running her hand along the ancient tree's bark. "The planet can defend itself to an extent, but it can't fight alone. That's why I'm here." "And now, why you're here?" Jake raised an eyebrow. "Me? I'm just a pilot, not some intergalactic hero." Lyra's soft laugh echoed in the clearing. "You think too small, Jake. The planet chose you for a reason. You carry something inside you that can help." Jake sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'm not sure what I could possibly offer." Before Lyra could respond, the ground beneath them trembled. The vibrations rippled through the moss, and a low, distant hum filled the air. Jake instinctively grabbed the nearest tree for balance. "Is that normal?" Jake asked, tightening his grip as the tremors grew stronger. Lyra knelt, pressing her hand to the ground. She closed her eyes, as if listening to something beneath the surface. "They're closer than I thought," she murmured. Jake frowned. "Who exactly are these invaders? You haven't told me much about them." Lyra's eyes flickered open. She hesitated for a moment before standing. "I suppose you deserve to know." The forest around them shifted. The glow of the trees dimmed as the ancient tree behind Lyra began to pulse faintly once more. Images swirled across its bark, fragments of the past, just like before. Lyra gestured toward the tree. "Watch closely. This is how it began." Jake stepped closer, his eyes fixed on the swirling images. The faint hum of the tree grew louder, and the forest around them seemed to fade away. The vision began in the same crystalline city he had seen earlier. The Solari moved gracefully through the streets, their silver skin shimmering in the sunlight. Jake watched as they tended to glowing gardens, their laughter echoing softly. But the peace didn't last. Dark shapes appeared on the horizon, blotting out the light. At first, they looked like distant shadows, but as they drew closer, Jake recognized the sleek, black ships that hovered above the city. The Solari gathered in the streets, their faces filled with confusion and fear. They didn't understand at first. Lyra's voice whispered beside him. They thought the visitors came in peace. Jake watched as a figure stepped from one of the ships. The invader wore a suit of heavy armor, its surface smooth and reflective. The helmet obscured their face, but their presence radiated an undeniable sense of power. "They don't look like conquerors," Jake muttered. Lyra's eyes darkened. They weren't conquerors at first. They called themselves harvesters. Jake's stomach twisted. Harvesters. The vision shifted. The invaders walked through the city, examining the Solari's technology and glowing plants. At first, the Solari welcomed them, showing them the wonders of their world. But slowly, things began to change. Jake watched as the harvesters began extracting energy from the ground, draining the glowing rivers and trees. The once vibrant city began to dim, its colors fading. "They didn't take our resources," Lyra said softly. "They took our life force." Jake clenched his fists. How could they do that? The vision darkened. The Solari fought back, wielding strange weapons made of light, but the Harvester's armor absorbed the attacks effortlessly. One by one, the Solari fell, their bodies dissolving into streams of energy that the invaders collected. Jake's chest tightened as he watched the city collapse. The invaders showed no mercy, harvesting every last drop of energy from the land. And then they turned their attention to the ancient tree. The vision flickered. Jake saw the surviving Solari gathered around the tree, their hands pressed against its bark. Light poured from their bodies, sinking into the roots. "This was our last stand," Lyra whispered. "We became part of the planet, to protect it." Jake exhaled slowly. "And now they're coming back." Lyra nodded solemnly. "Yes, but this time, we have a chance to stop them." Jake stepped away from the tree, his mind racing. "How? I don't have weapons or an army. It's just you and me." Lyra smiled faintly. "We don't need an army. The forest remembers them now, and it remembers how to fight." Jake's eyes narrowed. "You mean the planet can fight back?" Lyra extended her hand, palm up. A small crystal, glowing faintly, rose from the ground and hovered above her palm. "This is a fragment of the planet's core. It holds ancient energy, strong enough to disable their ships. But it needs a vessel." Jake eyed the crystal warily. "Let me guess. I'm the vessel." Lyra's smile grew. "You're catching on." Jake sighed, reaching out to take the crystal. As his fingers brushed it, the warmth from the connection ritual flared to life inside him once more. "All right," Jake said, gripping the crystal tightly. "Let's make sure history doesn't repeat itself." The rising threat. The crystal felt heavier than Jake expected, as if it carried the weight of the entire planet's memories. Its faint glow pulsed gently in his palm, matching the rhythm of his heartbeat. The forest around him remained quiet, but Jake could feel it, an unsettling stillness that hinted at something approaching. Lyra stood beside him, watching closely. Her silver eyes reflected the light of the crystal, but her expression remained calm, almost unreadable. Jake tightened his grip around the shard. "So let me get this straight. This crystal holds enough energy to shut down their ships, but I'm supposed to carry it, without turning into a light bulb." Lyra's lips curved into a small smile. "The crystal won't harm you. It's part of the planet now, just like you are. But its power can only be released when the time is right." Jake frowned. "And how exactly will I know when that is?" Lyra's gaze shifted toward the sky, where the dark clouds continued to swirl ominously. "Trust me, you'll know." Jake let out a slow breath, tucking the crystal carefully into a pouch on his belt. The warmth from the shard lingered, spreading through his chest like a quiet hum beneath his skin. The two of them began walking, the forest parting silently as if guiding their path. "So," Jake said, breaking the silence, "when they come, what's the plan? I assume we're not just standing here hoping they get bored and leave." Lyra's expression grew more serious. "They won't leave willingly. Once they detect the planet's energy again, they'll return in force." Jake glanced around at the glowing trees. "You said the forest remembers them. Can it fight back on its own?" Lyra nodded slowly. "The planet has defenses. The forest can shield itself, but the invaders learned to bypass those defenses before. That's why we need to take the fight to them." Jake raised an eyebrow. "How? I don't think we're exactly in a position to storm one of their ships." Lyra stepped ahead, leading him toward a ridge overlooking the glowing river. She extended her hand, pointing toward a distant valley hidden beneath the shadows of the mountains. Far below, Jake saw something glinting faintly beneath the moss, a structure almost buried by the planet itself. The shape was sleek and unfamiliar, but it resembled something he recognized. A ship. Jake's eyes widened. "Wait, that's a Solari ship." Lyra nodded. "One of the last. The planet kept it hidden, preserving it for the right moment." Jake stared at the vessel, its metallic surface barely visible beneath the foliage. Why didn't you tell me about this earlier? Lyra glanced at him with a knowing smile. Would you have believed me if I told you a warship was sleeping under the forest? Jake opened his mouth, then hesitated. She had a point. All right, he said, exhaling. What kind of shape is it in? It's functional, Lyra replied. But it needs a pilot. Jake frowned. You've been here alone all this time. Why didn't you use it yourself? Lyra's gaze softened. I can guide it, but I can't fly it. The ship responds to human physiology. That's why the planet brought you here. Jake blinked. You're telling me this ship is designed for humans? Lyra stepped closer, her tone calm but firm. The Solari learned from the last humans who came here. They saw potential in your kind. This ship was their gift, for a day like this. Jake rubbed his temples, trying to process everything. This is starting to sound like destiny or something. Lyra smiled faintly. Maybe it is, or maybe you were just in the right place at the right time. Jake let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head. Lucky me. Lyra motioned toward the valley. Come, we don't have much time. They descended the ridge carefully, weaving between the glowing trees and thick underbrush. As they approached the ship, the moss seemed to peel away, revealing more of the sleek, silver hull. The design was unlike anything Jake had ever seen, organic yet mechanical, as if the ship had grown from the planet itself. Jake ran his hand along the surface, feeling the faint vibration beneath his palm. It's still alive. Lyra nodded. The ship is connected to the planet. It draws energy from the forest. Jake stepped toward the entrance, which opened silently as he approached. Inside, the ship glowed softly, the walls lined with veins of light that pulsed gently in rhythm with his steps. The cockpit was simple, with a single seat and a panel of controls that hummed quietly. Jake slid into the seat, and the ship seemed to react instantly. Screens illuminated around him, displaying symbols he didn't recognize, but somehow he understood. Lyra stood beside the cockpit, watching carefully. The ship recognizes you. Jake glanced at the controls. I've never flown anything like this before, but it feels familiar. Lyra's gaze lingered on him. That's because the ship is learning from you. It adapts to its pilot. Jake exhaled slowly. Okay, let's say I get this thing off the ground. How exactly are we stopping a fleet of invaders? Lyra stepped closer, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. The crystal you carry is the key. When the time comes, you'll know how to use it. Jake stared at the control panel, his mind racing. And if I can't figure it out? Lyra's voice was soft but unwavering. You will. The planet believes in you, and so do I. Outside, the sky darkened further. Jake's eyes flicked to the horizon, where faint, distant lights appeared, small but unmistakable. The invaders were coming. The final battle and hope. The lights on the horizon grew larger, creeping across the darkened sky like a swarm of fireflies. But Jake knew better. Those weren't fireflies. They were ships, sleek, black, and silent. The invaders descended toward Solara like shadows swallowing the stars. Inside the cockpit of the Solari warship, Jake tightened his grip on the control panel. The ship hummed beneath him, the glowing veins along the walls pulsing faster as if responding to his tension. Every fiber of the vessel felt alive, almost breathing in sync with him. Lyra stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the approaching fleet. They're coming faster than I expected, she said quietly. Jake exhaled through his teeth. No kidding. Any chance we can just scare them off? Lyra's silver eyes met his. They've taken too much from this planet to walk away now. They won't leave until they drain the rest. Jake's knuckles whitened on the controls. He glanced down at the crystal shard glowing faintly on his belt. The weight of it pressed against him like a reminder, a promise that the planet's fate now rested on his shoulders. He swallowed hard. All right, then we don't let them land. The cockpit hummed louder, as if agreeing with his determination. Jake's fingers hovered over the control panel, and the ship responded instantly. Without a single button pressed, the engines roared to life. The ship began to rise, lifting gently off the mossy ground as if cradled by the planet itself. Lyra smiled faintly. "The ship likes you." Jake smirked, but the humor faded quickly as the sky darkened further. The invader ships were closing in fast. He pushed the throttle forward, and the Solari ship shot into the sky, weaving through the clouds with ease. The landscape below shrank away, leaving behind the glowing forest that pulsed faintly, as if watching him ascend. "There," Lyra pointed toward the fleet. "They're spreading out, looking for the planet's core." Jake narrowed his eyes at the fleet's formation. The ships weren't attacking yet. They drifted over the landscape in smooth, calculated movements, scanning for the planet's energy sources. "They're picking targets," Jake muttered. Lyra nodded. "They can't drain the planet unless they find its lifeblood." Jake's grip tightened. "Well, they're not getting the chance." He pushed the ship forward, streaking toward the invader fleet. As the first of the enemy ships came into view, Jake could see the intricate designs etched along their black hulls. The symbols pulsed faintly, almost hypnotically. Lyra's voice was calm but firm. "Don't underestimate them. Their ships can absorb energy from attacks. We'll need to disable them another way." Jake frowned. "You're telling me this now?" Lyra smiled softly. "I didn't think you'd want to hear it earlier." Jake let out a dry laugh. "Great. So what's the plan?" Lyra placed her hand over the crystal on his belt. "The shard holds enough energy to disable their ships, but only if you get close enough." Jake stared at the incoming fleet, realization dawning on him. "Wait, you're saying I need to fly into their formation?" Lyra nodded. "Close enough to release the crystal's energy. It won't harm you, but it will overload their systems." Jake exhaled sharply, scanning the enemy formation. He spotted a large ship near the center, clearly the command vessel. "That one," Jake said, pointing. "It's bigger, more guarded. I'm guessing that's the lid ship." Lyra's gaze followed his finger, and she nodded. "Yes. Destroying that one will disrupt the entire fleet's link to the planet's energy." Jake's eyes flicked toward the swarming fighters escorting the command ship. It wouldn't be easy. "All right," he said, rolling his shoulders. "Let's do this." The ship surged forward, cutting through the sky like a blade. As they approached the fleet, one of the smaller enemy ships peeled off, detecting their presence. Jake gritted his teeth. "Here we go." The enemy ship fired first, a bolt of dark energy streaking toward them. Jake twisted the controls, and the Solari ship dipped effortlessly beneath the blast, darting upward in a smooth arc. The cockpit lit up as energy surged through the vessel. The ship seemed to move on its own, almost anticipating Jake's next move. "The ship is protecting you," Lyra said softly. "It remembers how to fight them."